Hey guys, remember last week when I was summarizing key takeaways from Trump's first congressional speech and I said, he has a very free speech. And then I was like, in fact, look at this post he made threatening to deport people for criticizing Israel. And then a whole lot of people were like, no, that's not what he meant. He's just talking about deporting people who do crimes. And I was like, yeah, both the plain reading of his post and also his history suggest otherwise.
And I have stopped all government censorship and brought back free speech in America. It's back.
Guys, free speech is not so back under Trump. Republicans have been pretty egregious on this front for the past decade as well. I mean, they're not as bad as the Democrats, but it's just because they haven't been in power. Even just this week on Truth Social, Trump was basically threatening to criminalize college students for protesting things he likes. Here is his post where he said, all federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protest. Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No mask. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Not cool, bro. Well, needless to say, I remember, and it took less than a week for me to be proven right. Over the past 24 hours, the Trump administration carried out its first arrest under this new policy. Mahmoud Khalil, a graduate student at Columbia University who is here on a green card, by the way, and married to a citizen and also expecting a child in the next month, was snatched out of his on-campus apartment by ICE for his role in leading pro-Palestinian protests on campus, particularly during the Gaza Solidarity Encampment movement last year in April. This is very, very bad, okay?
That is not appropriate behavior, okay?
We are not China. We don't disappear people here. We're not even Europe, where we snatch people out of their homes for social media posts. I don't care how you feel about Israel, how you feel about Palestine. Make no mistake, this is a pure and simple attack on free speech. And no matter how you feel about the issues this man was speaking on, you should be alarmed over this threat to our fundamental rights. We need to dig in. First, I'm Hannah Cox. Welcome to my channel where I bring you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. Before we get started, make sure you like this video, drop me a comment, say hi, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so you never miss any of my episodes. Now, inevitably, I know the first thing people are going to ask when they hear that this has happened is what crimes did he commit? He must have been damaging public property or laying in the streets, prohibiting ambulances from getting to the hospital or hitting other students or attacking people. Like, he must have done something, right? No, wrong. He was basically a negotiator for the student activists during this protest movement that was taking place on campus. I remember this well. I was actually in New York City while this was going on. It was intense and insane, the amount of police presence that was also there. There really wasn't a lot of violence going down during this protest movement. But if there were incidents, number one, those things were already illegal and people already could have been charged and prosecuted for those actions. There was no need for Trump to add on this extra layer. And number two, there's absolutely no evidence that Khalil was involved if there were any crimes happening. He was merely advocating for the university to divest from companies that supported Israeli military actions in Gaza. And there is zero public record indicating that Khalil personally engaged in any illegal activities or property damage during these events. Now, the Trump administration is trying to argue that he is essentially an Hamas sympathizer, which I'm not even sure there's any evidence of that, but which is not a crime. I think it's really disgusting and also super stupid that when people criticize the Israeli military's actions, a large swath of the right and the Jewish population immediately try to label those people as anti-Semitic or supporting Hamas, which is simply not the case. It's very disingenuous. It's super toxic. And ultimately, they only harm themselves because this kind of behavior, trying to silence your opposition versus actually engaging with them and maybe even addressing some of their very substantial issues they have raised in this conflict, does not incur sympathy for your side of the aisle. I personally am a free speech absolutist. You will not shake me on this. You will not move me an inch. I stand by the old quote, I might detest what you say, but I will defend to my death your right to say it. This is an extremely slippery slope, I cannot emphasize that enough. And if you don't understand what has happened in this country over the past 100 years to our Bill of Rights, I implore you to go back and watch some of my original series of Based. I have a playlist on this channel where I did deep dives into the history of healthcare and privacy and education. And I helped people understand how our rights have been chipped away at, both through legislation and in the courts, so much so that some of them really only exist in name only at this point, like the Fourth Amendment. If you allow this kind of encroachment to stand against the First Amendment, you will not have it for long. And defending free speech, defending the First Amendment, as a former president of the ACLU pointed out, often necessitates you defending people who suck, okay? Like they had to come in and defend Nazis. They had to come in and defend racists. That's typically where you have to start because those people's rights are easy to target. They have no sympathy. They're disgusting, immoral people. The public is not usually interested in defending them, even when the principle of the matter is on their side. But that's what you have to do if you are going to meaningfully ensure that the First Amendment actually has teeth to it and is on the books. So whether or not Khalil is a Hamas sympathizer or not, I couldn't tell you because the water has been so muddied by disingenuous actors on the other side trying to label anybody who criticizes Israel as being that. But furthermore, even if he was, I would still be defending his right to free speech because you have to defend it at the very moment it begins to fall under attack. And if you do not, they will take an inch and then they'll take a mile and it will be your rights next. Maligning people who speak out against war is a tale as old as time in this country, but particularly when it comes to this conflict between Israel and Palestine. And this has been a breeding ground for attacks on free speech for almost 2 years now, something that I have spoken out extensively against. All the way back in 2023, we saw Congress, at the behest of Israeli lobbyists, trying to pass legislation essentially saying that not supporting Zionism makes you an anti-Semite. And when principled congressional leaders like Thomas Massie pushed back on that and called it out as the attack on free speech that it was, they tried to label him an anti-Semite. And I even got labeled in this whole battle because I stood up for Thomas Massie in free speech. And then people like Ben Shapiro and that weird guy at Newsweek, Josh Hammer, Bethany Mendel, Cassie Dillon, like multiple right-wing commentators who have Jewish backgrounds immediately tried to come and attack me and label me as an anti-Semite as well. Even though at the time I was literally, when this went down on Twitter, I was literally in a class exploring converting to Judaism. I kid you not. And I made a video pushing back on all of this at that time. And not only was I condemning their behavior, but I made the point that in the long run, this kind of action would make the Jewish people less safe. This is like when people on the left call a black person who holds views that are not within the mainstream of the Democratic Party Uncle Toms. It's disgusting and foul and heinous and racist when they do it. And the same thing applies to these people doing it on the right. It's inexcusable. I think it's understandable for people in Jewish communities to feel a heightened sense of fear right now. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, and these are very scary times. What I would do if I were afraid about a rise in anti-Semitism is not go and try to make up more anti-Semites out of thin air online. That's weird. It's not the behavior of somebody who's afraid. That's actually the behavior of somebody who feels they have politically the upper hand, wants to keep it, and is trying to shut down anybody who might dissent against them. It's major Karen energy. Furthermore, as somebody who actually is concerned about systemic racism, racism in general, and trying to eradicate it, this kind of behavior pisses me off because it seriously sets that kind of work back. When you conduct yourselves like this, you become like the boy who cried wolf. Nobody's going to believe you when racism does rear its ugly head. And you're going to find you have fewer and fewer allies to come to your defense when the need is there because you've maligned and smeared them with this kind of disgusting accusation. And what have we seen over the past 2 years? We have seen a huge rise in actual anti-Semitism. We have seen a huge growth in well-known right-wing commentators who are coming online, pushing conspiracies about the Jewish people, incurring more and more hateful sentiment towards them. And what you notice is that there are fewer and fewer people to push back on them. Again, because these people have muddied the waters, they have maligned good people. And at the end of the day, what they have done is create an environment where you can't distinguish the anti-Semites from the people who actually have qualms, very practical, real qualms with what the Israeli government has been doing.
Like, well, why do you think there's such a strong relationship between the two countries then?
Blackmail. I think blackmail. And I think this is the reason why we don't get to open the Epstein files. We don't get to open the JFK files. And I think it's a form of gaslighting us to pretend that our special friend and ally isn't just I mean, and by the way, parking aside America, other countries too. You investigate anything. I mean, I'm investigating Brigitte Macron, and Israeli blackmail comes up.
And I circled back on this on Twitter this week because I saw some of these same Jewish commentators and right-wing commentators talking about how like this has just exploded and how so few people are pushing back on it. And I made the point. I said, you know, there's two things to separate here. I love Jewish people and I love the Jewish community. I even explored a conversion not long ago. I have a deep appreciation for their religion and their practices. But on the second point, I dislike Israel's government and detest many of its actions, particularly in recent years. These two views should be super easy to square and hold without confusion. But a significant number of well-known people tried to label anyone who held the second viewpoint as an anti-Semite over the past 2 years. And as predicted, in doing so, they ensured there would be little ability to tell the difference between the two camps, and there'd be few to stand up for them against real anti-Semitism when it reared its ugly head. I was right. They were stupid. And their behavior has made the entire Jewish community less safe. Not smart people at all and not good people at all. They've acted very disingenuously. Aside from just the free speech concerns I have around what has happened with Khalil, and on top of the fact that I think there has been an intentional effort to try to lump anybody who criticizes Israel into a camp that says they're pro-terrorist or they hate Israel, I also think there is another problem at play here, which is that I believe the Constitution's rights that it upholds are universal. If you believe, as I do, that rights are natural rights, you cannot add positive rights, you cannot add negative rights. When people say you have a right to health care, you have a right to housing, that would be a positive right. No, you don't. You don't have a right to anything that requires the labor of other people. The Constitution was not put in place to give you rights. It was put in place to uphold natural rights, things that every single human is entitled to because they are created in the image of God and because we respect individuals. The Constitution was put in place to hold the government at bay, to restrict the government from infringing on those natural rights. It was not put in place to tell the government to give us certain rights. And that's why it cannot be added to, nor should it be taken away from, because these are natural God-given things. No government has the right to restrict you from these things so long as you are a peaceful and law-abiding person in society who is not hurting other people or their things. And so because of that, if you believe as I do that rights are natural rights, that means that all humans have natural rights, whether they are born in America or not. Yes, our government is restricted from infringing upon them. That's why so many people want to come here. That's why it's been such a beautiful, wonderful structure that has uplifted humanity. But that does not mean that if you were not born in the United States, that we don't think your rights count or we don't think you have natural rights. Of course we do. And look, you can get mad at me all you want about this. This is black and white. You can either be consistent on that front or you can be a big fat hypocrite.
He's a resident alien. He can be deported under U.S. law for if the Secretary of State has any reasonable ground to believe he would have a potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequence. And you mentioned the student organization. The student organization put out. Let me finish.
But before you move on, because I think that's a really important point, right? That's the statute that they're using.
Yeah.
Have you seen any evidence to suggest that there is actually a serious reason to believe that this student is going to be a threat to to national security?
I mean, I've certainly watched the abomination that's gone on at Columbia and Barnard and other places, and I will just tell you,
threat to national security.
And I'll just tell you that
I'm not going to let you move on because this is the
I'll tell you why it's a threat to national security if you let me answer you.
Well, Scott,
do you want me to answer you or not?
Okay.
His organization says we are dedicated fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization.
Okay.
He's not a citizen. He doesn't need to be here.
You just described him having viewpoints that you disagree with. Again, is that enough to have someone lose their rights in this country?
He has viewpoints that, in my opinion, jeopardize the security of the United States.
But how?
He is obviously a radical who is here to foment.
No, he's not a radical at all.
Violence against the United States government.
He wants to destroy Western civilization.
Against the United States government.
You're saying eradicate Western civilization doesn't make you a radical?
Has he acted in any way that is violence against the United States government, as you just said?
I think these protests and the violence they have fomented and the intimidation and fear against the Jewish kids on these campuses is absolutely an act of insurrection against the United States.
I don't think any American speech, Scott, that's enough.
Look, what they have engaged in is a clear threat to the United States. And if you want the United States to be overrun by radicals the way Europe has, be my guest. But I think the president needs to stand up for the integrity of the United States.
What is the threat?
The threat of our country being, and our college campuses being overrun by radicals who are trying to run Jewish kids off of campuses and anybody else who disagree.
Yes, they are.
Yes,
in UCLA.
No,
in UCLA.
First of all,
they wouldn't even let them go to class.
First of all,
Columbia's an abomination.
First of all, there were violent counter protests at UCLA that were done by Jewish organizations.
No, both sides. Anti-Semitism is a scourge on this country. Do not
absolutely
is that it is not clear that this particular student has engaged in the specific actions that he was talking about. And you've shown me no evidence of that either.
Okay, well, guess what? He is not a citizen. If he were a citizen, I might feel differently. He's a guest in this country.
Okay.
It's my view,
so in other words,
it's the Trump
you don't
administration.
have proof, but it doesn't matter.
No, I didn't walk in here with my gumshoe investigative case, Abby. But here's what I do think: this guy's running an organization at Columbia that has ruined 2 solid years of people's lives.
Deported based on allegations that you have not substantiated.
I think he should be deported based on what the Trump administration has already identified.
That's a clip of Scott Jennings on CNN, who I typically like and think he has interesting things to say on many subjects, but he's just flat out wrong on this. He's being super hypocritical because I think he's definitely in the camp who would say that we have natural rights, and yet he has absolutely zero issue with what's happening around this case. That's startling to me. And on top of that, there is the irony of him saying we don't want to be like Europe. You are being like Europe in supporting this kind of action and supporting the fact that people can be snatched out of their homes for speech you don't like. That's how Europe behaves. Whew, okay, I've got to pause here to take a break, collect myself. This kind of thing gets me fired up. It really makes me angry, guys. I think you can probably tell by my demeanor, but weigh in. Let me know in the comments. I'm curious for your thoughts, and don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel while you're there. Now, despite everything I've said, I think if you were to start from ground zero with the US Constitution and build up, and you put me in a court of law and I argued these points, I'd win because I'm right constitutionally, but I'm not stupid. I also know that the Constitution has been bent and shaved and completely twisted around in many ways. And there's been a lot of legal precedent that has been built upon it. And therefore, who's right, who's wrong in the eyes of the courts is still a matter that's somewhat up in the air. I think legally, the Trump administration would have had a much stronger leg to stand on here if they had merely attacked someone who was on a visa versus someone who had a green card as their first scapegoat. An account under the name A.G. Hamilton posted about this case and basically made the same point that had he been a visa holder, it would have been pretty easy for them to come in and revoke that and deport him. But because he seemingly recently obtained a green card, he is legally entitled to a greater level of legal protections than when he was a visa holder. The government will need to show that he is a national security risk or has committed some relevant crime in order to revoke his green card as part of a removal process. The Trump administration could have made things a lot easier on themselves in defending the general policy by focusing on visa holders, but here we are. I think Trump and his administration, at least in the previous term, were often very reckless and sloppy. I've seen nothing to make me think that he is going to change that nature in this current term. And I think this is just indicative of that. I truly wonder if they even fully researched this guy's background or what his immigration status truly was before they did this. It seems very haphazard. And not only does it seem haphazard in how they identified and targeted this individual, but once they removed him from his home in the presence of his wife, who is a citizen and pregnant, they also threatened her with legal action, which is just beyond the pale, completely insane. But then his family didn't know where he was for a period of time. They quite literally disappeared him. No one could find him. He wasn't being tracked in the normal systems. He's now shown up being registered in a Louisiana prison. But that is just terrifying. I can't even imagine being his loved one and having him taken from your presence in that way and then not knowing where he was. Fortunately, in the US, though, Trump is not the end-all, be-all. We do have a court system that operates as a check and balance, both on the legislature and on the executive. And when it comes to immigration law, I don't know if there's a more dense subject than immigration law. There is so much to unpack there. I would never profess to be an expert in immigration law. So we'll see what happens within the courts. But so far, his deportation has been blocked by a federal judge.
A federal judge has blocked the deportation of a Palestinian activist and Columbia University graduate who was arrested by federal immigration agents in New York Saturday. Attorneys representing Mahmoud Khalil have filed a motion as well to transfer him back to New York after he was sent to an ICE processing center in Louisiana. The Department of Homeland Security says Khalil was arrested for violating President Trump's executive order banning anti-Semitism. Khalil, who helped lead pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia last year, has not been formally charged with a crime and is a permanent resident with a green card. The president took to Truth Social Monday and said Khalil's arrest was the first of many to come. CBS News correspondent Lily Luciano has been following this for us. So, Lily, what do we know about what led to the judge's decision to block his deportation?
So what we know is that Khalil's attorneys have, of course, filed a petition to fight that deportation. We know, according to multiple legal experts, attorneys, immigration attorneys I've talked to throughout the day today and starting yesterday, that this is extremely unprecedented. The government has not provided evidence that Khalil was in any way cooperating, working with Hamas. And I have not seen any statement that the government is alleging that he made in support of Hamas even. I've talked to multiple students, faculty members who are all very concerned about this being a violation of freedom of speech. There is certainly, I spent the day today in Columbia, at Columbia University, there's certainly a chilling effect. Technically speaking, what I know about this order or this block on the deportation, the purpose of it is so that the court here this federal court does not lose jurisdiction. Because once somebody is deported, then it's very hard to bring them back to the United States to face a legal process. And so what the goal is to maintain that jurisdiction in this federal court where, as anybody, especially somebody with a green card, somebody who is a permanent resident of the United States, can fight a case.
As I mentioned, the U.S. has a long history of targeting protests, particularly student protests. We saw that during the student protest of the MLK era. We saw that at Kent University with the student protest against Vietnam when Nixon literally sent in the National Guard and gunned down students on campus. If you really start digging back in history, and especially history around war, what you will find is that many of the worst attacks against free speech, against the First Amendment, are all settled around war. They always have that component. You can go all the way back to like Woodrow Wilson and the Espionage Act, which has nothing to do with espionage and is, again, just a means for the government to attack people over free speech. And he passed that because he wanted to start attacking anti-war protesters during that time period. They used it to jail many of those lead actors who were peaceful people and who were effectively pushing back against war. Fortunately, our First Amendment, despite these very concerted, very powerful attacks, has managed to hold up better than many of our other amendments. And that is because people in my movement, in the nonprofit sector and the pro bono litigation sector, have worked tirelessly to ensure that it is defended. But this is no time to let up the gas. This should be alarming to each and every one of you. This should not be stood for. I can hope ardently that the courts do the right thing and push back on this, but that's not enough. We're talking about one case, and this is clearly an entire effort the Trump administration intends to carry out that they need to be shouted down on. So use your free speech to push back. All right, guys, I hope you like this episode. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you want even more content, you can follow me over on Twitter, TikTok, or Instagram.